If I asked you, what is the largest V8 engine ever installed in a commercial vehicle in the United States? Most people would answer almost immediately, Cadillac 500. Others might think of more modern names, louder, more powerful. But American mechanical history sometimes does not live where the spotlight shines, and it does not always belong to the machines that are mentioned the most. A machine that people only remember when it stops working. Something that rarely happens. In today's video, we will rewind to the late 1960s to meet a silent giant from GMC. This is the story of the GMC 637 cubic inch V8, an engine that was large not only because of its displacement, but because it represented a time when American engineers dared to take a different path, placing durability and the responsibility of real work above reputation. To understand why the GMC 637 is so special, we need to place it alongside the biggest names in Detroit during an era when displacement was considered a declaration of power. Throughout the 1960s and into the early 1970s, American automakers entered a quiet arms race. Who had the bigger engine? Who could pull harder? Who could make rivals uneasy with nothing more than a number printed on a brochure? At the peak of the passenger car world, it is impossible not to mention Cadillac with its 500 cubic inch V8, produced from 1970 to 1976. Developed from the 472 cubic inch platform introduced in 1968, the Cadillac 500 was installed in heavy, luxurious Eldorados and represented the height of the bigger is better philosophy in passenger cars. This was the largest V8 engine ever mass-produced for American passenger vehicles, and for decades it was regarded as the ultimate benchmark of displacement. But Cadillac was not the only one playing this game. Ford had its own answer with the 460 cubic inch V8, a durable power plant widely used in both passenger cars and heavy-duty pickups. The Ford 460 was not flashy, but it was known for its strong torque and dependable towing ability, true blue-collar power. On the Mopar side, Chrysler released the 440 cubic inch V8, one of the most balanced engines ever made in terms of power and durability. Although smaller in displacement than the Cadillac 500 and Ford 460, the 440 left a deep mark on the worlds of muscle cars, NASCAR, and superstock, becoming a cultural symbol inseparable from the Mopar name. As for AMC, the smallest of the Big Four, they had the 401 cubic inch V8. On paper, the 401 appeared modest compared to its rivals, but in reality, it was one of the most aggressive engines AMC ever produced, famous for its thick block walls and high load tolerance, especially in performance applications. However, all of these engines shared one very important thing in common. They were all designed around passenger cars and the consumer market. No matter how powerful or how large their displacement, they ultimately served driving experience and brand image. And it is right here that the original question must be reframed accurately. We are no longer asking which passenger car had the largest engine, nor are we talking about showroom icons or machines built to impress. The correct question is, which V8 engine was the largest ever installed in a mass-produced commercial vehicle in the United States? Once understood this way, many familiar names are immediately eliminated. Legendary muscle car engines, no matter how powerful, still served the consumer market. Even more modern configurations, with greater displacement or more cylinders, do not belong to the world of heavy-duty trucks. They were created for performance, for experience, and for image. Some might point to the V10 engine in the Dodge Viper, which exceeded 500 cubic inches in the early 2000s. On paper, That is an impressive number, but it was a limited production sports car, not a commercial vehicle, not designed to tow loads, not meant to run tens of thousands of hours under heavy duty. It does not belong in this discussion. When all confusion is set aside, the answer begins to emerge more clearly, even if it is unfamiliar. Between 1966 and 1972, GMC put into production a 637 cubic inch V8 engine installed in heavy-duty trucks, fire apparatus, and buses. This was not an experiment, not a concept, but a true commercial engine, sold, operated, and maintained in real-world service. To understand why GMC arrived at such a bold decision with the 637 cubic inch V8 engine, we need to return to the company's very specific context in the 1950s and 1960s. At that time, GMC was not simply Chevrolet with a different badge. GMC operated in what was almost a separate technical world, especially in the medium and heavy-duty truck segment, where the priorities were not speed or driving feel, but durability, torque, and the ability to work continuously. While Chevrolet built its reputation on small block and big block 90-degree V8s, GMC chose a different path, developing large displacement V6 engines with a 60-degree angle designed purely for trucks. This was a countercurrent decision, because at that time, the V6 had almost no standing in American car culture. But to GMC, the V6 was not a cost-saving solution. It was a technical tool to achieve high torque at low engine speeds. This engine family began with displacements of 305 and 351 cubic inches, then gradually grew to 379, 401, 423, and finally 478 cubic inches. Each increase in displacement came with thicker cast iron blocks, heavier crankshafts, and designs increasingly focused on durability. That was exactly what truck fleets, construction vehicles, and public service operations needed. The peak of that thinking was the Twin 6 512, with a displacement of 702 cubic inches, produced from around 1960 to 1966. From an engineering standpoint, the Twin 6 was essentially two V6 blocks joined together, creating a 60-degree V12 that was extremely smooth and rich in torque. But the price paid was size and mass. The Twin 6 was too long, too heavy, and too complex for the new operating trends of the transportation industry. By the mid-1960s, GMC faced a difficult problem. They needed to replace the Twin 6 with an engine that was more compact, lighter, and easier to maintain, without losing the low-speed torque philosophy that had defined their name. It was in this context that the idea of a new engine, based on the V6 platform but expanded to 8 cylinders, began to take shape. And that was the direct foundation for the birth of the GMC 637 cubic inch V8. Instead of creating an entirely new V8 block, GMC leveraged its most familiar foundation, the 478 cubic inch V6 from the Big Six line. From that block, they lengthened the casting, added 2 cylinders, and retained nearly the entire structural philosophy that had already been proven through millions of operating hours. Because of its V6 origins, the GMC 637 retained the 60-degree bank angle, an extremely rare choice for an American V8. While most Detroit V8s used a 90-degree angle to achieve natural balance, GMC chose to go against convention in order to create a narrower engine, easier to package in truck frames and the tight engine bays of fire trucks and buses. In exchange, they had to address vibration through additional mechanical solutions, rather than relying solely on the engine's natural geometry. In basic specifications, the GMC 637 was a classic over-square engine. The piston bore reached 5.125 inches, while the stroke measured only 3.86 inches. This design was not intended for high engine speeds, but to reduce average piston speed, limit wear, and extend service life when the engine operated continuously under heavy load. To GMC, a good engine was not one that revved quickly, but one that could run for tens of thousands of hours without requiring major overhaul. Another interesting detail lay in the layout of the ignition system. The spark plugs were placed deep inside the V-valley, away from the intense heat of the exhaust manifolds. This arrangement helped protect the ignition wires, reducing the risk of failure when the engine operated at full load for long periods, a critical consideration for fire trucks and public service vehicles, where failure was simply not an option. Overall, the GMC 637 V8 may not impress at first glance, but that is because it was never designed to shock with high rev numbers or peak horsepower. In gasoline form, output was around 275 horsepower at 2,800 RPM, while torque reached approximately 600 pound-feet at just 1,600 RPM. When placed next to the twin 6.3 12,702 cubic inches, the engine it was meant to replace, the 637 V8, reveals its clear logic. It was nearly a foot shorter, about 90 kilograms lighter, and had fewer moving parts, helping to reduce maintenance costs. Peak horsepower between the two engines was nearly identical, while the V12 offered only slightly more torque. For GMC, this trade-off was entirely acceptable because the benefits in size and practicality far outweighed the modest torque difference. Alongside the gasoline version, GMC also developed diesel variants based on the 637 platform, known as the Toro Flow line. The naturally aspirated version produced around 195 horsepower, while the twin-turbo version delivered roughly 220 horsepower and 460 pound-feet of torque. Although less powerful than the gasoline engine, the diesel was better suited to fuel economy trends and long-haul operation in heavy-duty trucks by the late 1960s. And one particularly striking detail is this: an engine of more than 10 liters in displacement, built to pull heavy loads every day, yet equipped with only a 2-barrel carburetor. This helped keep the air-fuel mixture stable, easy to adjust, and reliable under all working conditions. In terms of driving feel, the 637 V8 runs completely counter to the common image of a large displacement engine. It is an extremely smooth machine, to the point that many drivers described it as whisper quiet compared to other truck engines of the same era. The sound it produces is deep, even, and steady, more like an industrial generator than an automobile engine. But it was precisely the rise of the Toro Flow diesel that inadvertently pushed the gasoline version of the 637 V8 into the shadows of history. Modern documents, fleet records, and operational memories often refer to GMC 637 as a diesel engine, while the gasoline version, despite being the original foundation, gradually faded from collective memory. And that is why the GMC 637 V8 has become one of the least talked about engines, even though it once carried some of the heaviest workloads in American transportation history. Looking back at the entire story, the GMC 637 cubic inch V8 was not an engine born to become a legend in the familiar Detroit sense. It never had posters on garage walls, never appeared in racing, and was never tied to the youthful memories of speed enthusiasts. Yet that very absence says a great deal about the era that created it. The GMC 637 was a product of a time when American engineers were still allowed to prioritize technical solutions over image, durability over emotion, and to experiment with off-standard layouts such as a 60-degree V8 or the development of diesel engines directly from a gasoline platform. It represented a purely truck-oriented mindset. Work first, reputation later. And in that world, the 637 carried out its role quietly and effectively. It is difficult to imagine today a major automaker daring to introduce an engine with more than 10 liters of displacement for only a few years of heavy-duty truck service and then allowing it to disappear when corporate strategy shifted. Yet that is exactly what happened with GMC and the 637 V8. Perhaps the greatest loss is not that engines like the GMC 637 are no longer produced, but that we have fewer and fewer chances to see them, hear them, and truly understand the engineering mindset that created them. If you know of another commercial engine with a similarly massive displacement or a remarkable story like this one, leave your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe so we can continue exploring the legendary machines that helped shape history. See you next time.